prostate cancer, and then another guy's mom is in her 90s, same age as Charlie, 92, and he's not going to be able to come. He's got a monitored heart tonight, so this is going to be the crowd for the night. I don't think you really need to introduce Butch. He's got 16 books out. I think I've read most all of them. They're good reads. I have all of them.
Good.
I actually read them, but they're really good reads. They're very informative. If you haven't read anything else about Indian history in this area, if you pick up Doublehead and read that one, and then read it twice, because there's so much detail in it, it's going to take you a minute to digest it. Then you read the Culbert book, and then you start in on the Cottonmouth King books from the different counties, and that will bring you up historically everything that happened after 1650 coming into the 1830s, 1840s time frame. They're super books. So Butch, please enjoy yourself.
I appreciate it. I want you to look at the first map up there at the top. You notice that the Cherokee Nation included most of the southeastern United States at one time, but there's some particular areas on that map that I want to point. If this thing gets to wiggling too much, don't pay any attention to it. But you got the valley towns, the middle towns, and the lower towns that were actually taken out in 1776 by General Griffin Rutherford and Andrew Williamson. Now, they were with the colonial army, and they were fighting anybody that was English or supported the English, and of course the Cherokees at that time did. But this was actually, when they took out those three major towns, it was actually genocide that occurred, because they killed men, women, and children. They really did not care. And after that atrocious, I guess, genocide, the tribes scattered from those areas into the overhill towns and down the Tennessee River. And that's how we wound up with a lot of people that really, they had a kind of the blood law that they wanted to revenge on people that came into this area. And Doublehead established himself, we know, around 1770 on the Muscle Shoals, and basically his stronghold was at Melton's Bluff. If you look at this map, you'll see that you got Chickasaws and Cherokees, and the reason for that was the United States government on January 10th, 1786 was in a war, in the Chickamauga War. They were fighting the Indian people that lived in this area. And Pio Mingo had gone to General James Robertson, and they'd set up kind of a peace deal, and so the Chickasaws kind of went toward peace with the United States. And so when the United States did that treaty, Hopewell Treaty of January 10th, 1786, they actually deeded, or by treaty, give the land to the Chickasaws all the way to Hobbs Island and Chickasaw Old Field south of Huntsville. The Creeks you see down here at the bottom, they claimed, though, that they owned the land all the way to the south bank of the Tennessee River. So that's pretty well documented. But anyway, starting in 1776, Cherokee lands began to be reduced greatly. And you can see by 1770 to 1838 right there, but this part right here from 1816 was done away with, and this area right here was the only remaining area in 1838 into Georgia, into the edge of Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama. Okay, and I'm talking about Indian people that actually inhabited and lived in this area. And I want to say, before we even start looking at Doublehead, that his extended family lived along the Muscle Shoals. Brothers, sisters, a lot of his relatives were in this particular area. By 1770, there's two groups of people that were fighting for their freedom and for their lands, and that was the white settlers of the colonies and the Cherokee people that lived on the lands that these white people were taking. It's pretty obvious who won. But here I talk about Andrew Williamson and General Griffin Rutherford and their colonial armies. Now, what happened after the valley towns and middle towns and lower towns were actually demolished, and I mean demolished, In one account, one historical account, they talk about putting a log between two horses and destroying a cornfield of 900 acres of standing corn in the spring of 1776. They destroyed fruit trees, they burned houses, they absolutely destroyed those three major towns of the Cherokee people. So we had Doublehead that really was, his stronghold was established between Mallard Creek and Fox's Creek, and it was referred to as Doublehead's town. It was at the head of Elk River Shoals, located on the south bank of the Tennessee River, near where Brown's Ferry is located. Brown's Ferry nuclear plant is located today when they changed. Anyway, if you look at this map, you notice that Doublehead's town, located right there, was at the head of Elk River Shoals. This is the Big Muscle Shoals right there, and this was where the Browns Ferry crossing was located, and that's where Doublehead's town was, and that's where he fought the Chickamauga War out of Doublehead's town. Another map from the Atlas of American History by James Adams shows Doublehead's town at the same place. Here's Coldwater, and this is Coldwater that was burned in Tuscumbia by Robertson in 1787. Now, the battle, actually the war that Doublehead was involved in, and he nearly got killed about 3 or 4 different times, but it lasted until June the 26th, 1794, when he went to Philadelphia and signed a treaty at Philadelphia with President George Washington. And when he was there, somebody asked him about white folks. He said, well, white man's flesh is too salty. He didn't like it too much. Okay, look at that. There's a mistake right there, Doublehead's town. Okay, about 1802, Patrick Wilson came down the Tennessee River, and he stopped at Doublehead's home, but Doublehead had already moved in late 1802. He moved to Shoal town, which is located right there. This is Big Nance Creek, and this is Town Creek. Now, a lot of you are going to say, wow, that can't be right, because north is at the top of the map. This map was drawn between 1802 and 1807, and the south was at the top part of the map. This is Second Creek. Let's see, this is Second Creek, and this is Blue. No, one of them, I believe this is Second Creek, and I believe this is Blue Water because it's reversed. In other words, it's upside down. Here's the big map of the Natchez Trace, and you can see that the way the map is oriented, the Natchez Trace is going to be, looks like to the east, but it's actually to the west. So in your mind, you got to flip that map over. But his town was located, and this is an important thing right here, Big Nance Creek. This town creek was actually called Shoal Town Creek, and it was referred to as Shoal Town by Captain Edmund Pendleton Gaines in December 1807. Okay, Doublehead's Trace was an important route from Nashville, and you'll notice it talks about Doublehead's Road. This is a historic map in Florence that was done in 1970, and the road actually come out of Nashville to Columbia, and from Columbia to Loretta. Now Loretta, the road forked, Doublehead's Trace forked. One fork came by his place at Blue Water, and the other fork followed all the way to the Shoals and crossed at Bainbridge on the Tennessee River. And here's an interesting thing. Biloxo Turnpike was approved December the 16th, 1819. And in days, according to historical records, it was completed to Jeffrey's Crossroads. Now, there was a tavern there called Gregg's Tavern that was established by 1810. Jeffrey's Crossroads was established early as I can find is 1808. Gregg's Tavern became a toll booth by 1820. So from December the 16th, 1819, if the historical record is true, and that thing was done by 1820, they proceeded pretty rapidly from the river to Leeton or to Jeffrey's Crossroads. Now, I want to say this. Jeffrey's Crossroads was an Indian village, and those crossroads were Indian trails. Now, And a lot of people say, oh, man, that can't be true. The fact is that that area was an Indian territory to the Turkeytown Treaty of 1816, September the 16th, September the 18th, 1816. If a village was in Indian territory, it was an Indian village controlled by the Cherokee people. If a road or a route was in Indian territory, it was a road or route controlled by Indian people. You had to have passports to come through the Indian nations at that time. Okay, you can notice this picture right here. There's a beautiful story about General John Gregg. Now, General John Gregg was born on the Lawrence County side, what became the Lawrence County side of Doublehead's Trace. And his family was the one that run the Gregg's Tavern that was located at Jeffrey's Crossroads. Now, Jeffrey's Crossroads did not become Leighton till after William Lee and Robert Lee, who were big slave owners. I think they came out of Virginia, and they bought vast tracts of land, and just east of Jeffrey's Crossroads, William Lee established his plantation, and there's a big historical marker there. If you've been through that area, you know where I'm talking about. But after 1824, I think, when William Lee and Robert Lee got here, that area became known as Leighton because the Lee family actually owned it. But I do want to tell you a little bit about this guy. This guy, I really believe, if you'll look at him, you'll say, well, he's probably not Indian. But if you look at pictures of Richard Fields, he looks more Indian than Richard Fields looked. And Richard Fields actually fought with Jackson as a Cherokee warrior. But General John Gregg, one interesting thing about General John Gregg is he married General Jesse Winston Garth's daughter. And Jesse Winston Garth was the largest, I think at one time he owned 189 black slaves. He was the largest slaveholder and the largest landowner in Morgan County, Alabama, and was one of the primary founders of the town of Decatur. And after they married, General Gregg moves to Texas with his wife. And in Texas, after they get to Texas, of course, these planters were always moving to better cotton lands and carrying their slaves with them. They were looking for money. They were trying to make a lot of money. But General Gregg came in command of a group of Texans. And in 1864, if I got the date correct, I believe it's 1864, General John Gregg got killed at the Battle of Richmond. And this is what's so interesting. At that time in 64, all the railroads were just about destroyed in the South because the Union, that was one of the primary targets for the Union. Supposedly, John Gregg's wife got a buggy and a wagon. She drove to Richmond, Virginia. She retrieved the body of her husband. She came all the way back through a war-torn country to Aberdeen, Mississippi, buried him in the Odd Fellows Rest Cemetery in Aberdeen, built a house there on her father's plantation in Aberdeen. He owned a big plantation there, and lived there till she was 90-something years old, I believe, and died and was buried beside her husband. Very, very beautiful story about the Gregg family. But he was born in Lawrence County, on the Lawrence County side of what was Lawrence County.
And you think he was Indian, do you, Bush?
I sure do.
Yeah.
Gregg's Tavern was an Indian establishment, or it was a mixed blood establishment, and the Jeffreys were mixed blood. We had a bunch of the Jeffreys family that was in the Indian program when I was over the Indian education program for 24 years for Lawrence County School System.
Right.
And all of them testify to the fact that the Jeffreys were Indian, Cherokee.
The tavern or the inn has been moved from the corner there at 20th and Main Street, moved about a half block away. Is that the same tavern?
I wrote about it in the Black Folk Tales of the Mosa Shoals.
Okay.
I went there with Mr. Houston Cobb. He said Claude King built that big brick house there in the corner where Gregg's Tavern stood. And that they had a bet. I talk about the gentleman that had the bet. He bet this guy he could take his horses and move that tavern. And so they took logs, he hooked up his horses to the house, they moved the tavern one block to the west. But when they got there, the back of it was facing the road, the old Tuscumbia Road, or what was the Upper River Road at one time. It was an Indian trail because it was at the Jeffries. Remember, Jeffries Crossroads was there in Indian territory, and the road was an Indian road. So they moved it one block to the west, and they looked at it and they said, well, the back is facing the road. Well, that's okay, we'll leave it. So the back of the tavern today is facing the road instead of the front of the tavern.
Over a bet.
Over a bet, but he won the bet.
That's what I'm talking.
He won the bet. All right, if you notice on the upper mount, Doublehead Spring is located right there. You see it? Blue Water Creek is where it comes into the river. If you've been there, I don't know how many of you have been there, but just about a quarter from Blue Waters Creek is a bluff line, a real steep bluff line that is a point of a bluff line. Just between that bluff line and where the creek empties into the river is a little pocket. That is Doublehead Spring. That's noted on this map. I think this is an 1818 map of Doublehead Spring. You notice another thing too, Melton's Bluff, and you notice it's also called Marathon, Cortland, Gorge Settlement, let's see what else. Town Creek was Shoal Town Creek. And notice here, Big Nance's Creek. And you can't read Fox's Creek, but right there is Fox's Creek, named after Noli or Black Fox. We'll talk about him in just a few minutes. Okay, in the Treaty of January the 7th, 1806, Doublehead was given one of the largest reservations that I know of any individual Indian that I've ever heard of. It went 10 miles north of the Tennessee River and about 40 miles across, went up Cypress Creek and Elk River. And it's estimated to be around 250,000 acres of land. So the city of Florence actually was in Doublehead's reservation. And also, when John D. Chisholm come back, he was also in that reservation. Okay, around 1806, after the treaty was done, after he had this block of land, he started leasing lands to white settlers. Now that created a problem. Now Doublehead, I can't talk about everybody in Doublehead's family, all of his kids lived here too, and there's a lot of other people that lived here, but this is one of the main characters that lived here, is the reason I'm spending time on him. If you'll notice, this little section of land right here, that's the county line between Limestone County on this side, Lauderdale County on this side, and Limestone County on this side. So part of his reservation was actually in Limestone County. Now when it hit the river, when that range line hit the river, it followed the river to the river, and that became Limestone County. But Limestone County was there prior to that boundary being drawn right here. I'll explain this to you. In 1806, the Cherokees give up the land to the north of the river except for Doublehead's Reserve. That's where he owned that property. So he actually had part of what became Limestone County. In 1805, the Chickasaws give up a block of land from the mouth of Flint River. It went 45 degrees across to the Tennessee state line, and it took in this whole corner of northeast Limestone County. The county was actually organized, Madison County was actually organized on December the 13th, 1808. And it was organized as Mississippi Territory. It wasn't Alabama, and it wasn't Alabama Territory to March the 3rd, 1817. So it was the first county in Mississippi Territory in what became the north part of Alabama. About this one here. Another relative of Doublehead, and folks, listen, if you get on the internet and look at some of these things, like we talked about the Kentucky connection, you'll read a lot of garbage. WikiTree has took everybody that was supposed to be kin to Doublehead out, and there's documents that prove that some of these people were actually his kinfolks that here. I want you to realize that he came into North Alabama with an extended family, a large extended family. He didn't just come in here by himself. But anyway, one of his sisters was Acuma. Now Acuma, I tried to translate that name. I first thought it was Obima, because that looks like a B and that looked like an E and that looked like an M and it looked like an A. But there's a lady that's supposedly a writing expert, and she said that she took out this. She said it was an unintentional mark right there, and she took it out. I don't know if she's right or not. She claims it was Akuma instead of Okuma. Both of them are pronounced about the same, so what difference does it make? You know what I'm saying? But this is you know where that came from? That is very historic right there. That is her handwriting. This was a smart lady. John Melton's wife was not a dummy. She wrote her name, and that is how she wrote. Now, the lady said that she took out those extra lines that didn't belong there, and that's the reason I thought for years it was, and I still believe it could have been. I don't think all those lines she took out were necessary to be taken out. But that is the handwriting of Doublehead's sister when she lived at Melton's Bluff. Now, John Melton married Akuma, and this is her statement that she wrote in that letter that she signed like this. She said, on June the 30th, 1815, John Melton became, this was the date of the letter, and this is what she said. John Melton became a resident of the Cherokee Nation 35 years ago and married me not long afterwards according to the established custom of my nation. Well, the photo shows her signature on the letter, and after that, she initialed MT, Mississippi Territory. At that time, it was not Alabama Territory. It didn't become Alabama Territory until 1817. So the letter is a great piece of history, really. But anyway, John Melton we know that he was here around 1780 at Melton's Bluff and helped establish a town. And in 1806, in that Cotton Gin Treaty, Doublehead was the one they were primarily trying to negotiate with. Doublehead put that cotton gin at Melton's Bluff. Now, my thought is, why would you put a cotton gin in somebody you didn't know that wouldn't kin to you maybe? So the evidence to me supports the fact that Okuma was actually a sister of Doublehead, even though WikiTree has took out nearly everything that I don't know why they do it, but they have people that monitor these sites, and it's their opinion that, and they said, well, we can't prove it. And I said, you can't prove it's not true. You know, it goes both ways, but they want to look at it their way. Another thing that was placed at Melton's Bluff was a blacksmith by the name of Samuel Hall. Now, Samuel Hall was a white man, and he was there to teach young Cherokees the art of blacksmithing. You'll read more about Samuel Hall when Doublehead was assassinated, because Samuel Hall wrote a letter, and it's in that book, Doublehead, and he accused John Rogers of the murder of Doublehead. He said he was riding Doublehead's horse, he was covered with Doublehead's blood, he had all the counts of murder. You just have to read his letter, it's in that book. But anyway, according to her letter, John Melton died on June the 7th near present-day Lucy's Branch, and supposedly buried in the McNutt Cemetery in Limestone County. Now, I think it was your brother that said he had heard for many years and told me that the brother-in-law of Doublehead was buried in the McNutt Cemetery in Limestone County. And it stands to reason, since he was living on the north side of the river in Limestone County, and he died there, that he was probably buried pretty close by. And Lucy's Branch, if you go over to Lucy's Branch, that was about the same area where John Melton lived. Now, Lucy, according to historical records, was half black and half Cherokee. I think she was a descendant of one of John Melton's sons and one of his slaves, to be honest with you, because she moves to Oklahoma and lives in the same area where the Melton family settled. David and Lewis became actually partners on a treaty when they got out there. But notice here, on September the 5th, 1810, 2,250, at least 2,250 settlements signed that SIM settlement petition. So there was still a lot of white people. Now, what was the confusion when I showed you a while ago of these territorial boundaries, with Madison County running across the northeast corner of Limestone County and Doublehead Reserve taken in, people didn't know where the lines were. Those lines had not been surveyed. So the government, so what happened after Doublehead's death? The Cobberts and the Chickasaw says, hey, we don't want these white folks in their land, we want them moved. If you can't move them, we'll try to move them ourselves. So the government built Fort Hampton around 1810, sent soldiers in to forcefully remove those people off their land. Now in the Limestone County Cotton Book, I went to the trouble of looking up who came back to Limestone County after they were removed. And it looks like at least a third, or if not a half of them, moved back, and there's an asterisk by their name if they're located in the Limestone County land records after 1818. Okay, Okuma was born about 1750. That means she is maybe 16 years younger than Doublehead. And of course, John Melton was an Irishman, and they had some daughters. I think they had 3 or 4 daughters, but the history records does not. One of them says Ray's wife. Ray was a pilot, and that's the only daughter that they really identify, but there was more daughters than that. But anyway, you notice he had Charles, who moved to Garnersville and formed Meltonsville right at the mouth of Town Creek in Marshall County, where Town Creek, you think, well, what is it named for? Well, it was Wattstown Creek. John Watts, who was John Watts Jr., chief of the Cherokee Nation after Dragon Canoe died in 1801, settled between Watts Creek and Reedy Creek that forms Town Creek that goes into Garnersville Lake today. But anyway, David, he went west. Eric went west with him. James stayed as a keelboat pilot for Malcolm Gilchrist. No, let's see, Lewis went west, and I think Eric did too. All 3 of them did. Marita, he wound up entering land in right near Mount Hope, close to John Jarrett. Do you remember, Mr. Jackson, the John Jarrett rifle? Mm-hmm. You know where it was found? Where? In Iowa. Oh, is that right? Yes, it was found in Iowa, and the guy showed it to me not this past year, but year before last, when I was over there at the Long Rifle Show. Yeah. I saw that rifle. I said, where did this rifle come from? He said, it was wound up in Iowa. Guess what? Marita, that guy right there, left Mount Hope and wound up in Iowa. His kids, some of his kids were buried in Iowa. Those kids went on to California. Some of the kids went to Texas. Thomas, he also was found in the 1820 census of Lawrence County, but after 1820, these 2 people were gone. Moses Melton is listed along with Charles Hicks as being half owner of land at Spring Creek. So Moses Melton, some people say that Moses Melton was the son of John, but no, he wasn't. He was the son of Lewis, and that made him the grandson of John Melton. But they also lost their land after 1818. Here's an interesting thing about Anne Royal when she wrote about. She said Mrs. Melton would take into her head to go into the kitchen and after she took a dram and kick up the dust about dinner. She wanted to model cooking after her own mind, that is Indian fashion, so we know she is Indian. She, the cook, being responsible to her master for forthcoming dinner, would go to her master upon the old man, would sally forth with a whip in hand, and fair words fail, the horsewhip always restored order. So John Melton was probably a pretty vicious fellow, because he might have took a horsewhip to his wife, I don't know. But one of the first pilots was an Indian pilot, James Melton. Now James Melton had a great-great-granddaughter, and I've talked to her a time or 2. I don't know what's happened to her. I don't know if she died or not, but she lived in Melton. So some of the Melton family is still around. Some of the Melton family I've talked to lives in, the lady that did the name Okuma lives in California. Some of them still live in Texas. But these were people that lived right here along the Tennessee River on the Muscle Shoals. Go ahead. And that's the emphasis of this whole thing. Now, David, this is what he did. The first white landowner that was legally controlled and owned the land on November the 22nd, 1816, was Captain John Hutchinson and General Andrew Jackson. This is the deed. I, David Melton of the Cherokee Nation, do hereby, and look, he gives enough houses that will house the Negroes of the said Andrew and the said John, and possession of other houses before the first day of February, for which I acknowledge to receive $60 in cash. We know he received more money than that. But the point being, John Melton wound up with some 60 slaves, and his son, when he got to Oklahoma, I can't find any record of him carrying any slaves with him to the west. He might have carried some of them, but obviously Andrew Jackson bought the majority of them. Okay, Andrew Jackson, after he settled there, called the place Marathon. It was surveyed by General John Coffey. I put the Melton historic marker right in the center of town, right on the side of the river road. The road between Spring Creek and Malley Creek and the river road is the same river road that comes through here, and it was an Indian road or Indian trail that was traveled in 1715, and the guy wrote about it, and I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. Anyway, after Jackson owned the land a while, he had a black overseer that kind of lost control. He got in financial trouble, and when he started running for president in 1828, he went ahead in 1827 and actually sold the Melton's Bluff plantation, and part of it was bought by Colonel Richard Jones, and this is the Caledonia plantation. Now, there's an important story that I need to tell you about Caledonia. He had a daughter named Daniela Jones, and she married Colonel Benjamin Sheridan's grandson, Benjamin Jones. They had the same name, but Colonel Benjamin Sheridan had, some folks say, around 700 slaves. He had a plantation for each one of his children. Locust Grove was William Crawford Sheridan. Frederick was Chantilly, located at 20 in Arnold's, where the Loves are. Samuel Sheridan on the Bear Creek Plantation, where the Sheridan Cemetery is, just off of 25 miles west of Tuscumbia. Pond Spring belonged to Felix, who was the father of the young Benjamin. Alamance belonged to, I can't think, but the Hard Bargain belonged to his daughter. I think her name was Susanna, and married Samuel Shackford. So he had a plantation. He owned all of Patton Island at one time, which is one section that goes from Wilson Dam all the way down here. But anyway, she married Daniela Jones, married Benjamin Sheridan, and he died just before the Civil War. She moves back to Caledonia. General Joe Wheeler crosses the river. I think it's October 1863. Is that the correct date? I believe it is. I'm not sure. I'm just talking off the top of my head. But anyway, he stays at Caledonia at this plantation house, sets up his headquarters there. He meets Daniela Jones Sheridan that had just inherited the Pond Spring plantation. In 1867, he comes back to Lawrence County. He marries Daniela Jones, instantly becomes a wealthy man because he has Caledonia, and he had Pond Spring plantation where he built the Wheeler home, where the Wheeler home stands today. Samuel Sheridan died along with his brother about the same time, I think in 1845. Samuel was brought back to Wheeler and buried and Frederick was buried in the Sheridan Cemetery on Bear Creek. It's just on the south side of Highway 20, on the east side of the little Bear Creek. It runs into the Tennessee River, just about 5 miles from Tuscumbia. Okay, Nance was definitely one of, I don't care if Wicked Tree takes her down or not. It don't make any difference to me, but Nance was one of Doublehead's sisters. She lived in Lawrence County near the mouth of Pathkiller's Creek. Now, where did it get the name Pathkiller's Creek? In December the 27th, 1807, Captain Edmund Pendleton Gaines made this statement. We proceeded the same course 6 miles at 116 chains west of Melton's Bluff, past Killer's Creek, 3 chains wide from the top of the banks. Okay, Big Nance moved there. Here's the creek right here. This is Big Nance's Creek. There's Melton's Bluff. This is Big Muscle Shoals right here. This is Elk River Shoals right here. The creek was called Big Nance's, means possessive, just like Fox's is possessive. But here's what was said after the death of Doublehead. Nance claimed Doublehead had right at 40 slaves. John Melton, his brother-in-law, and his sister had about 60 slaves. Together they had about 100 slaves. But Big Nance claimed 2 of those slaves. And here's what John D. Chisholm said, and it's written historically. This is his words. Lost nearly all of my property. 2 Negroes ran away in the possession of Big Nance, Doublehead's sister. I have been constantly with Taylor Husky, it's pronounced half a dozen different ways, but it's still Talontisky Binge. He was the daughter of Warte and trader John Binge. Now Melton was also a trader too. I forgot to mention that a while ago. John D. Chisholm was born in Ireland, August 8, 1738, according to some historical records. Some people say he might have been born in the United States. But we know by July the 2nd, 1791, the Treaty of Holston, he became a close associate and business partner of Cherokee Chief Doublehead. This is his tavern that was built at White's Fort, which became Knoxville. The tavern was right next to Governor Blunt's home, and he was involved in the Blunt conspiracy. John Chisholm was. He goes to England. They tell him he better get back on a ship and go back to America or he would be prosecuted. Blunt was wanting to form a colony, take Florida from the Spanish and form his own colony and become king, but he was kind of ostracized by the Senate, but he got back in good graces somehow. I don't know how they didn't keep from executing him.